Welcome to Nurturing Resilient Boys and Masculine Identified Youth, a key to building safe, healthy, and sustainable communities. We have Paul Braden, Stephanie Noriega, and Mark McKenna from Boys to Men. I'll be following up with their bios. And so every day, Desert Star is working to advance reproductive justice in Arizona. Our mission is to create equitable access to reproductive and sexual health care while centering Black and Indigenous people of color. We envision a world where people can receive reproductive and sexual health care regardless of their zip code, ability to pay, and personal circumstances. Beyond our mission and vision, our work is guided by 4 priorities. We provide a steadfast resource for comprehensive family planning, gender affirming and sexual health care, and a safe and welcoming environment for historically marginalized people who generally face barriers to health care. And we do this through our Desert Star Health Justice Clinic. We train the next generation of abortion providers within a reproductive justice framework that focuses on the whole person through our next generation abortion provider program. The nonprofit started in 2017, and today we have trained people from 19 states in 3 regions of Canada at our Health Justice Clinic here in Phoenix. We deliver educational content. Thank you for joining us for this today, and programs that help people from historically marginalized community access reproductive health care and exercise autonomy over their bodies and their lives. We recently completed a pilot program called Doulas for Change, providing continuing medical education for doulas here in Arizona. We also have a long-term birth control program. And then lastly, we engage, build relationships, and mobilize local policymakers, advocates, and directly impact the community members toward an Arizona that provides the conditions for people to freely decide when and I am going to go ahead and turn it over to our guests. Let me introduce you first. So let's go. Let's see, who do I have first that I see? So Stephanie is showing up on my screen here. So Stephanie Noriega is a 4th generation Tucsonian and member of the board of directors for Boys to Men Tucson. She is an assistant director of community engagement and impact for the University of Arizona College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. In this role, Stephanie partners with community groups on and off campus to craft engagement initiatives such as the Community Classroom Program and Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion JEDI Academy. She also serves as the program officer for the Peter and Pat Hirschman Fund, which supports practice research projects focused on developing or enhancing community-based social justice programs. Stephanie holds a master's degree in social work and has been working toward collective liberation of humanity, primarily through gender-based violence and reproductive justice movements. She has dedicated her life to leading from an anti-oppression framework necessary to bring justice to those who experience multiple layers of violence and trauma. She spends much of her time traveling around the state as a sports mom, and when possible, she enjoys spending downtime with her husband, 4 sons, and dog Leo. Welcome, Stephanie. We look forward to your contribution to this discussion tonight. Next, I see Mark. So Mark McKenna is a 5th generation Tucsonian who has a deep-rooted reverence for his desert home. His love and connection to the land developed early on while being raised on the west side of Tucson, next to the Tucson Mountains. Having the access in childhood to play, explore, connect, and learn from the natural teachings of his home, he quickly developed a passion for sharing and learning from the healing gifts nature freely offers. After many years of working across behavioral health, restaurant, and service industries, he is now thrilled to bring his expertise to positively impact the youth in our community. In his role at Boys to Men, Mark is overjoyed at the opportunity to provide mentorship to youth in school talking circles, community organized events, and within the beauty of nature on adventure weekends. Outside of work, you'll find Mark teaching yoga classes, cycling along the loop, cooking creatively for himself and the community, and spending as much time as he can in nature. Welcome, Mark. We look forward to your contribution to this conversation tonight. And we have Paul Braden, who is fairly new to Tucson, but has worked in youth and community development for over 7 years. Their team provided education on topics including, but not limited to, reproductive health, healthy relationships, effective communication, consent, toxic masculinity, substance abuse, homophobia, transphobia, and LGBTQ plus advocacy. Originally from Wilmington, Delaware, where they were the former United Way of Delaware Pride Council co-chair, they help provide support for LGBTQ plus adults and youth throughout the state. Paul believes strongly that providing youth with the tools for critical thinking, the ability to create an open mindset, and safe spaces for youth to discover who they truly are without judgment is key to helping create sustainable change in our world. In their role as program manager, Paul supports the Collaborative Vision for Boys to Men mentorship programs with a deep understanding of the systemic roots contributing to the need for this work, and adapts to emergent dynamics within the communities they serve. Help me welcome Stephanie, Mark, and Paul to get this started, and I will hand it over to you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for joining us on a Tuesday, late afternoon, evening, and just, for tuning in with us. Thank you for sharing all the work that you do in the state, in the community. All of this is really critical work. It's a part of my heart work, so I just can't thank you enough. It is absolutely a labor of love, and I totally get that. So I just want to make sure I mentioned that. And so and thank you for inviting us actually to have this conversation. We were all really excited at the thought of having this broadcasted for other folks to attend. That's not just us in this room, right? That's the usual folks that have this conversation. So I'm really looking forward to just sharing our thoughts, ideas, and what the community has to offer as well. So to get us started, is really about why are we having this conversation? So I'm going to get this started. Just give me 1 second here. So I'm going to put and just a note for the audience, I'm going to ask some questions I'm going to pose some questions to Paul and Mark. And we're just going to kind of talk through. We talked about it doing sort of a panel / podcast style with some Q&A at the end. So as we go through our questions, I will be putting them in the chat so that you're able to follow as we go along. So as I am doing that, my first question is, talk about the role of men in the fight for reproductive freedom, and why is it important for men to be involved in this space? And so again, we want to start off big. We want to start off with the why. Why are we having this conversation, and why does this matter?
Thank you, Stephanie. Again, wonderful to be here and super excited for this conversation. To jump right in, the role of men fighting for reproductive freedom, for me, starts with the basis of any group that's fighting against oppression, right? You're going to need some of the oppressors in order to step in to help lead the charge on that, to take up and, go against their peers to help start the conversation around these different things. If you are in the position of power, it is your responsibility to use that privilege, to use that power to help begin the conversations and start the change to go against those that are holding others down. What do you got, Mark?
What are your thoughts?
I think Paul said that beautifully. Also, yeah, thank you so much to all the organizers to just allowing us to be present for this conversation. I myself am just very excited to participate and learn from the wonderful panelists I have next to me. And yeah, I think Paul covered all the pieces that were swimming around in my mind. I guess the things that I think about also are just feeling how, there's a lot of passivity or sense of passivity with men in regards to reproductive health. even just the idea of like allowing all of that conversation to be like a woman's conversation or a femme person's conversation, it's just inequitable. Men have obviously a significant role in reproductive health and wellness, and especially in that aspect of being an oppressor and being, I don't know, just an energy that's not necessarily always supporting balance and compassion. And I think it's just really important to show up with a type of presence so that we listen to our whole community, so we can hold space for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I was having this conversation earlier. We're talking to sort of just, make sure that we were, we felt good about these questions. And it's interesting because it was, and I love it that we all sort of came at it in different angles. And so I think, what Paul and Mark said is 100%. And when I think about it, and, as a person that is, in the reproductive justice movement, I always think about reproductive justice being about bodily autonomy, right? So we often think about, a person's right to abortion, a person's, right to have children, but there's this whole space in between that I think we don't, for folks that are sort of outside of the movement or outside of this work, we often don't think about. And I think once we know how to what that framework is, we can invite folks into that conversation. And so for me, I love to start with bodily autonomy. We all deserve bodily autonomy. We all have a right to just be well. Like we think about it in terms of like wellness. And I was talking to Mark earlier too, and it's with this idea of bodies. I often think about historically, men of color, in particular. I mean, everyone, folks of color, and folks of lower socioeconomical class. We can go into all of that, but when I specifically think about men of color, oftentimes their bodies have really been reduced to means of labor, right? Labor and at times violence, but we'll get to that in a second. But when we are socialized in that way, we start to just kind of forget that like we are all whole and human, and we all deserve to live well in our bodies. We all deserve to be resourced in our bodies and to say, hey, what we want and what we don't want. And that includes that literally is everyone. And so I just think, when I think about engaging and bringing folks in the conversation and say, hey, this means you too, it really is about just, knowing that. And it's starting from a young age. So, my bio mentioned, I have kids and, I have sons, and at a young age, I teach them that their body is theirs, right? Like, and you can set boundaries around your body, and, consent is for you too. So it just really kind of introducing these concepts, and it all having to do with it all has to do with for me, reproductive justice, right? And these are sort of like my family and parental values, and until and as they get older, and then young boys turn into young men, hopefully they have this, I think, in this in my utopia, right, this idea of holding their bodies as a sacred vessel, therefore they're willing to fight for it, and then they're willing to fight for me, right, whenever we feel like our rights are under attack, because we are that much connected to ourselves and to each other. Then we have this investment. We have this investment in ourselves. We have this investment in each other, and that really is, I think, for me, if I could just make it a slogan into bringing people in, that's really what it is for me. Is I have the right to hold my body as a sacred vessel, and protect it, just kind of hold it in that sense. So those are my thoughts on why it's important, because again, for me, it's for everyone, and it's for my kids always, you know, they tell me I'm cringe or I'm corny, you know, but I say it's for everybody, right? So like literally, and all bodies are good bodies. And so you know, it's sort of like this idea of like the book that I often think about is Bell Hooks. We're going to be mentioning Bell Hooks a couple times in here, but for me, it's feminism is for everyone, right? It's not just for women and girls and femmes. It really is about all of us. You know, it has to do with all of us, and our ways that we can relate together to fight for, you know, equity and justice for everyone. I love that. I'm blabbering on, so I'm not really following the chat, but I love how yes, there's, you know, talks about, you know, everybody. It literally is about that. So yeah, and I think also, you know, getting comfortable, you know, with things in your body too. And I think as well, we're going to address the man box right now in a minute, where, you know, that's where we start to kind of, you know, get taken away from our safety and our right to be safe in our bodies, you know, as socialization kind of seeps in. So, I mean, with that said, let me transition us into another conversation. So I'm going to actually skip around a little bit in our plan. So thanks y'all for hanging with me. And so the next question I'm going to ask is, how does rigid, patriarchal, and stereotypical masculinity norms lead to violence, specifically violence against women and children and poor health outcomes, right? So we talk about an ideal world. This is what bodily autonomy and freedom and justice looks like. But we all know that we live under patriarchy, right? We know we live under these systems of oppression that then, you know, it kind of takes us further away from ourselves. So y'all, what do you think? You know, how do these rigid stereotypes and masculinity norms, how do they impact us?
So living in this patriarchal colonized society, right, forces this situation on masculine individuals and very much limits them to only be able to show certain emotions, certain actions, and certain behaviors, right? This is going to lead in a little bit to that man box that you were just referencing, kind of very much limiting who a man could be to a very particular individual, which unfortunately typically makes them violent. It's one of the few ways they are able and allowed to express themselves, having forced to cut off the nurturing, caring parts of themselves to survive a patriarchal society, right? So we'll speak a little bit more, but I definitely want to let Mark get in on this. He has definitely some good bits.
Yeah, thank you both. I'm gonna read a little bit of something I just wrote up that felt appropriate to share here. Let's see. Rigid, patriarchal, and stereotypical masculinity norms have long been identified as key drivers of violence, particularly against women and children, as well as contributors to poor health outcomes for men, for whole families, really. At Boys to Men Tucson, we believe that these norms not only harm individuals, but also have deep, pervasive effects across entire communities. Our mission is to challenge and redefine these norms in order to support whole, authentic well-being for masculine-identified youth and adults.
Stephanie, we lost Paul and Mark.
Okay. I was wondering, it froze for a minute and then. Yeah, so I'm seeing on the chat folks asking, yeah, so it seems like there was some kind of glitch that maybe a few of us experienced. So if you give us just a couple of seconds to get back on track, we appreciate your patience.
Oh my, Mercury is retrograde. Of course it is.
I very much appreciate that commentary on the situation.
So, we did get through the part, Mark, where you read what you had written, and then you were about to start providing some commentary on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me just get back to everywhere that got lost for a moment. Yeah, so men's violence, it affects entire communities. It's not just men, and it's not just women and children. It's a whole family and a whole community disruption is something that I like to think about. Some of the stats around men's violence are going to be men are both often victims and perpetrators in over 90% of homicides here in the US. Over 85% of people who commit murder are men. 90% of the women who are in jail for convicted murder are incarcerated for killing their male batterers. So again, in situations of violence and self-defense, women are jailed for those domestic abuse situations. 90% of people who commit violent physical assaults are men. And then I'll go down to, yes, all this violence in the home, outside of the home, a lot of that, the bulk of is all men's violence. And then men's violence towards themselves even. In the United States, almost 40,000 men died of suicide in 2022, which was the 8th leading cause of death. Men died by suicide at a rate of 3.85 times more than women. And just all these things to say to like stoke the conversation around like what this says about the culture of masculinity, what it says about how men are socialized, and what happens, I guess, in the life of a young masculine identified person that transitions them into resorting to violent behaviors and actions. That's one of the big things that kind of give me a passion for the work that I'm involved with. We work with youth on the daily basis, and we hopefully are meeting youth at a time in their life where we can create conversations around options for behaviors and practices that will lead away from violence as opposed to towards violence. Yeah, those are just some pieces I'll share there, and I'll hand it off to whoever would like to speak on that from here.
So when we're talking about the man box, this is kind of what we mean. By literally putting young male identified folk into a box that limits who they are as a person is what our society has done. This comes from media, from family, from friends, from everywhere in our society. It has this pressure of what a man is supposed to be like in our society. No crying or exposing any emotions besides anger, maybe a little bit like of goofiness or laughter, sometimes inappropriately, right? No weakness or fear, always in power, always in control. They're supposed to be the dominant presence in the room. They have to be a protector, right? Because nobody else can protect or take care of themselves. Only the men have to do everything. They can't do anything feminine. They must be heterosexual. They better not do anything that shows any homosexual tendencies. They have to be tough. They have to be athletic. They have to be strong. They have to have courage. They're the only ones that can make the decisions, and they don't need any help. And women are viewed as property or objects or even any kind of lovers in those situations, right? It is a lot of pressure we put on these young beings who have more than this going on in their lives. They have so much more that they can express, that they can feel, that they can go through as a young masculine person. But slowly, they have to metaphorically chop that part of themselves away, mutilate themselves internally in order to fit safely inside this man box and be accepted into society and specifically other men. So then when you're telling men they have to be in control, they have to be strong, they have to be aggressive, it is not a surprise that when those are pushed to the only limits they're allowed to explore, those are their only areas they're allowed to express, that they become dangerous and violent, not only to everyone around them, but to themselves. it's very toxic environment we put these individuals in. It is not surprising who they become because of that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think about it, and it's, to say the very least, right? It's exhausting. It's exhausting, right? Like, it's exhausting for the people who are in the box. It's exhausting for people outside of the box. And so, you know, I think as we're talking about it, you know, this is male violence is a public health issue very much. I mean, it's a lot of different kinds of issues, but if we want to frame it, you know, in the public health sense, it is a public health issue, you know. And I think about, you know, especially when I'm talking about looking at all of this, you know, the amount of trauma and that comes from being in the man box and having to stick in there, and the consequences of what it is for people to be outside of that, right? For masculine folks, for boys, you know, to be outside of that, there's some real consequences, right? There's you know, bullying, made fun of. There's violence, you know, that people endure too, you know. And so you know, that, you know, that trauma is all compiled up, right? When folks think that they have to act a certain way. I also think about it too, in terms of, you know, we had met earlier, we were having this conversation and we were talking about, you know, ACEs, and we were bringing in the conversation of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences as well. And, you know, how we tie that in together with, you know, toxic masculinity is, thank you so much, Paul, is, you know, all of these pieces. And if you look at what actually constitutes as these ACEs, so right, that means, you know, if there's a person under the age of 18 years old, you know, experience multiple of these markers, you know, then the higher risk they are of going into adulthood with health issues, right? And that could be mental health issues, emotional, physical, and I would even say spiritual, right? We are unwell, right? We are an unwell society with these norms. And so, you know, if you think about, you know, yeah, the emotional neglect, all of that, you know, the ideas of thinking that, you know, young boys don't need emotional intelligence and things like that, you know, that all contributes very much to childhood trauma, or some folks who do try their best, perhaps, and maybe the whole family system is in an unsafe situation, maybe one of the parents. So just all of that to, you know, kind of, you know, all plays into each other. And this is where we see, you know, there being some major public health issues related to violence. I'm reading a little bit about, you know, what Dr. Taylor's putting in, and you know, we'll get there to a second, is, you know, one of the tenets of reproductive justice is being able to parent in safe and sustainable communities. And so this has very much everything to do with what we're talking about, whether it's ACEs or whether it's the man box, you know, socialization. All of this is all connected, right? That's why I love reproductive justice, because with that kind of framework, we are able to make the connections, and we realize that we see that we're all connected and we all have a place, right, to struggle with each other for better health outcomes, for you know, for healthy children, for healthy parents. So absolutely. I just, you know, thank this, you know, that putting this together and helping us, you know, really make the connections and understand how all of these play into reproductive justice and the tenets. So yeah, do either of y'all have anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I definitely agree about how it ties it all together. And I specifically appreciate going back to you talking about your children and like the bodily autonomy and different things like that. Because just like recognizing, because to me, not only bodily autonomy, but bodily familiarity and just like the whole concept of like the self as a whole and what that means. Because again, that's going to immediately tie into how we prevent that man box, right? By teaching a young masculine folk to love and identify his full self, recognize that parts of his body, you know, while they may not be, they should be private in certain situations, aren't like something to be wielded or used or like you know, determine their worth in even some things. You know, there's so many things that are tied into like sexual interactions that all tie into that man box and a sense of worth and different things like that. So there's so many different ways that reproductive health and masculinity tying together and getting some kind of like reframing in that way to like show yourself, being able to show yourself a sense of love in so many different ways that you're able to accept yourself with is definitely, to me, a huge step in that direction and how we start fighting against all of those adverse community environments that lead to all those adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, I think if we could, for me personally, naming it in a quick sentence, what are the, to what is a detriment of, the man box, to what detriment, it is really, it's dehumanizing. It is taking us from our own humanity, right? Of being, like you're saying, you just, Paul, with you recognize that we're whole people, and we have, needs and wants and again, the reproductive justice tenet of, and we should be able to have our needs met, right? And so this is where, oftentimes in reproductive justice, we say that and we mean it in more of a political level, a policy level, but like when we're really kind of we bubble it down to that sort of interpersonal / personal, like what does that look like personally, interpersonally? I think about that, right? It's like recognizing that, your humanity, you're a whole human being and you have rights and you have needs, and it's your right to have that need met, of course, with boundaries and consent. We can get into all, we won't have time to get into maybe all of the nuances because, I do think that power and privilege does absolutely play when we talk about different identities. So I don't want to be remiss, but just kind of just throwing these concepts out there. I'm looking at the time and I want to get to a couple different things. So we already, I'm just going to put this out there. We already sort of touched on it, but one of the questions was explore the whys, give norms, but more importantly, how are some ways to replace those harmful norms with frameworks that are nurturing, safe, and healthy? So really focusing on that last part. So we talked about all the consequences, right, to toxic masculinity and socialization, but like, so then what, right? How do we replace those with the safe norms with new ones?
And I think that's going to be at least twofold, right? Like probably like a billionfold. But like looking at it from like if we're trying to change that in the lens of working with masculine identified folk, specifically with adults, with grown masculine folk, trying to work on being able to literally, how do I say, is like break those norms with the homies, right? like being able to practice that sense of love, being able to practice that sense of connection with your friends and your peers, if you're a masculine person, to be able to kind of like break that, which in our circles we're already seeing that. We asked some of that question with some of our youth that we work with and everything, like, is it okay to say I love you to the homies? And like mostly all hands go up. So that's super encouraging, right? So being able to start that culture among yourself and amongst your friends of that love and kind of changing what a man is allowed to do, especially around love. And then on the other side of that, though, also holding our peers accountable, specifically when it comes to the masculine folk, right? When you're seeing behaviors that only promote this negative concept, these toxic masculine traits and everything, when you see things that are continuing to objectify others and continuing the dehumanizing process, being able to create spaces where you have conversations around that and not make like somebody feel like you're calling them out as a bad person where they can't do this anymore, but really just helping them understand the why and what's behind that and make them see the entirety of what the action is, because sometimes it's just people who have been so socialized into thinking these are harmless jokes or actions. It's like boys will be boys and all that, when really they just need to have a conversation that gets a little bit deeper and allows them really explore what's going on with those actions. And then on that same note, for the other side with the youth, stop letting boys be boys or actually let boys be boys, right? Instead of using it as a way to cover up harmful behavior and just dismissing it and not being able to have like a good conversation about having, a caring space and holding all youth to the same standards and everything, instead of, accidentally or intentionally grooming them from a young age into certain boxes. Being able to like let boys fully exist in any way that they want to, and also really, trying to, from a young age, stop these behaviors that are going to put them and force them into this man box. What you got, Mark?
Yeah, I know you have some gems, Mark.
Those were bars, Paul. I love hearing that. Dang. So, I mean, I think a lot of points were covered that I feel strongly about. Just again, echoing a lot of Paul's sentiments. I think that just around that idea of how do we replace the harmful norms, there is I think, a deep responsibility as a man in society to be accountable for, you know, that part of the culture that I have played into throughout my life, right? So being honest with, I've participated in harmful masculinity norms. That's something that was modeled to me growing up, and it was the only option at times for me to be accepted by a community. Otherwise, I would not have acceptance or the love that I desperately needed as a child. And then also just like bring up the conversation that like men's love is barricaded by violence. You have to engage in violent acts and behaviors to even access the love of your peers or your fathers or your uncles or your tios or your grand, like that's crazy. But being able to say that, identify it, and then as a man, like working to understand, repair, and take accountability for all those things, to call it out and interrupt it every opportunity I can when it occurs. So I think that's a big piece. Like men call it, again, there's an idea of calling out versus calling in and ways to approach it. But I think at the very least, we interrupt violence when it's occurring. As men, I do believe there is a responsibility on men to interrupt it when you see other men perpetuating it. And all of us, I think that's a whole community, a whole family approach as well. I think things that can be discussed too are like, culturally, I was told by tias and my grandma and my mom at times that boys don't cry. Right. And to like not cry if you're a boy. And so it just understanding that those man box like dimensions are reinforced by everybody. And again, reasons for that like are rooted in survival and acceptance and all these different things. But this conversation hopefully can like spark more of those from a place of curiosity rather than shame. And that's another thing, right? Is like around that violence portion is shame is leveraged in order to prevent men from having these conversations. And I think that's something that is really important in order to replace them with the harm with the well-being, is to destigmatize and do our best we can to shift the culture away from shame to curiosity and to what can it look like to be authentic and full in whatever masculinity is, which is going to be something different for every masculine identified person and something different across cultures, across belief systems, across whatever, as long as we can explore that in ways that are non-harmful and like centering authenticity, all of it's okay. Right. And I think also like going back to the youth aspect, it is so imperative for me as a mentor, someone, a man who has access to youth in those settings, to model what I believe is healthy and authentic and whole and well. So again, how to replace the harm, I need to be doing the work. If I'm in front of youth, I need to be doing this work and engaging in this process of reflection and like honesty and curiosity, and ask the women in my life, how am I doing? How am I showing up? There's ways that I'm going to make mistakes, and I need to be able to sit and listen, right? Like if I wanted more love from men in my life, how am I showing up tenderly with the youth? How am I going to show up in ways that are patient? How am I going to show up in ways that are like thoughtful or kind or caring? I could just keep on going forever, so I don't want to take too much more time. But yeah, that's what my wheels are spinning in that direction with that question.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I love it. I mean, we talked, about this being, having a part 2 and 3. I mean, we can go so, wonderfully deep with this conversation and with our offerings. So thank you so much, Mark and Paul, for sharing your thoughts. I am aware of the time, so I just want to make sure that so I'm going to put out the last question to kind of just round us out here. And then we're going to get to the Q&A section. I know that we have a question in the Q&A chat, so we'll get to that in a second. And then if anybody else here has any questions, I offer you to put in the Q&A section, or if we have time at the end, you can come off mic and actually, I don't know if we could do that in the webinar, but we'll figure it out how to get some other questions answered. So the way I would like to round us out in this conversation, so again, going back to this idea of, talking about masculinity and men's role in the reproductive justice space, right? So are there any thoughts? Do y'all have anything else on your minds and in your hearts about, that specific reproductive justice principle of regarding the right to parent in a safe and healthy community or environment? Any thoughts to kind of close this out?
So I think the whole theme, what comes up strong with me is specifically around like masculinity and healthy environments and communities, is the whole theme of like the dehumanization. Because when you dehumanize, you destroy community, right? Like one of the main things we had said in the man box was, do everything independently, essentially, like make all the decisions, stand alone. And we're social creatures, right? Like we're humans, we're pack animals. Being able to connect effectively with others with love and everything, create those spaces is essential to help raise the next generation and our babies and our children and everything. So being able to show up fully and authentically as ourselves in those spaces, be supported and seen and loved by everyone is the only way that's going to happen. And the way things are currently set up, it's designed 100% against that. So again, rehumanizing and building on love is exactly this space that we would need that specifically. And I just want to make sure I'm not getting too far away from the question. Because at least for me, it was long enough ago that the internet wasn't really a thing yet. When I was a kid, we all still were able to go outside, and all my family lived at least like 700 miles away or something like that. So we were able to have the family of like the neighbors and the friends and everybody who was able to come in and everything to help and support each other. And then just like we had our own little, I was raised in Delaware, so I called it my Delaware family because I didn't have any other family in Delaware. And I think that's so necessary and important to be able to do that. And I don't think the way that we treat masculinity, and again, it was because we had mostly feminine neighbors. It was mostly single moms and different things like that. They were able to come together and support each other. So because there was a lack of masculinity almost is what enabled that. And I think that's really sad, unfortunately. And being able to reframe that and build that again so that we can have those safe spaces with masculinity is how we move forward.
Thanks, Paul. The question being, can we ask the question one more time?
Yeah. Just if you have any final thoughts or anything that you want to share, we're rounding out this conversation and really kind of ending on the note of the reproductive justice principle of the right to parent in a safe and healthy environment. So, with that in mind, do you have any closing words?
Oh, I just believe that men need to be having these conversations, and in that conversation, men need to practice listening and patience. It's something that I didn't see a lot of men practice growing up. I never saw, I reflect on this to youth often, and at least in the circles, it mentors youth. A lot of people, when I'm having these conversations around men's work, is like, I did not ever have an adult man apologize to me until I was like well into my late 20s. And I have been harmed by men from as early as I can remember to today. So men showing up in ways that center humility and compassion and ownership of their behaviors and just of like systems that benefit them. There's always like a deep discomfort for men to sit in, that I've witnessed, for men sitting in hard conversations that require deep emotional rawness and availability and vulnerability. And so I think the thing that I think about is I hope to be a father one day, and I hope to do my child, my community, my partner, however that family looks, I hope to do that a deep positive service. And in order for me to do that, I believe that I just have to really be listening and asking questions the whole way through, in a way where I model that I know I don't know everything. And again, that was just such like a deeply like imprinted message on me, is men have to know it all. And men have to know it all in order to lead well. And one of the best examples of male leadership I've ever experienced was when individuals had the humility to be like, you know what, I have no clue about that. Let's find out together. Right. So like just a cooperation and like a listening centric way of learning and leading, I think is something that men can lean into and learn from and practice with one another and practice with families. So I don't know if I answered the question exactly how it was asked.
Yep, nope.
But yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yep, I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I'm of the mind of come as you are, right? This is us actually being in practice.
Mhm.
This is what it looks like, y'all. Like, this is the work, like just showing up however you are. There's no right or wrong. There's no, like, I know I tend to be a little structured sometimes, and I've been, saying to Paul and Mark this whole time, like, thank you for letting me be. Thank you for letting me, like, make sure we have structure. But I think creating the space and then figuring out where we can start practicing, like in this space right now around, this is what it looks like to just show up with who you are, with what you have, speaking from your heart, and whatever people get at it is going to speak to them, right? But I think first and foremost, just speaking your truth. And I'm deeply appreciative of, sharing this space and being in this conversation. I'll just add just with a few thoughts at the end to finish us out. But I think though there are a lot of people who are, when we talk about those statistics, right? It's like, dang, like what's going on out there? And we know what the world looks like. We know that it's a harsh place. We know that there's so much violence, and we are truly in some scary times. We know that. And I refuse to think that that's it. We also do a lot of really great things, and there's also like a lot of great people and communities that we have and that we're still building. So, I just, when I think about holding on to that tenet, and when I think about, the idea of bringing people into this movement, it's really just understanding where I come in, where you come in, Mark, and bringing people in that way. A lot of people are already committed to their families in a way that saying, hey, I don't want this no more. I'm gonna break this cycle of violence. I'm gonna break this cycle of toxicity. No more. This ends with me, right? So this is we're really living in those times, and I really want to hold on to that. And so I think, just framing to those people, that is reproductive justice 100%, right? Your commitment to yourself, your parenting, your families, your community, that is reproductive justice. You are doing the work to bring people in the movement, and you're doing social justice work, right? That is social justice work. So and healing work is social justice work. And so I'll end with that, and just feeling really deeply inspired. I know that we have a question. Dr. Taylor, did you want to read off that question, or I saw you come back on camera?
Yes, I will read the question. Thank you guys so much. This has just been so wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So the question in the Q&A is, does reframing masculinity help the reproductive justice movement? Why or why not? Will or does reframing masculinity help the reproductive justice movement? Why or why not?
For me, the short answer is when you help masculine folk rehumanize themselves, they then begin to humanize everyone else around them and build that sense of love, which like everything else then ties into, right? you're able to like see more, feel more, and support more. So that's my short answer.
Any, Stephanie, Mark, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, absolutely. I think I just kind of maybe spoke to some of the pieces right now, but we all need each other. We all, we're as strong as, as we are together. So, absolutely. I think once we find ourselves, and again, where we enter this movement, what our roles are, I believe that we all play different roles. I believe that we all have different strengths, with different passions, but there's, I think the strength is pulling it together and finding our commonalities, and working towards building a better world.
Yeah, thank you for all those thoughts. Yeah, no, I mean, I just think that reproductive justice, community justice, and men are part of this community. And I think that, again, absolutely, these things play into each other, and absolutely they support each other. And I think men, again, destigmatizing and being a part at the table, even if it's just to listen, is so critical, so that we can support in any of our ways, in any of the ways that we have privilege, to amplify voices and amplify these ideas, so that so changes happen. We need to support the people who are most affected and most oppressed by these systems, even if that means they're most oppressed by us, right? And we need to be honest with those things and just get the ball rolling together. So yes is the short answer.
I love that. And what was really important to me is someone who goes out to speak and advance reproductive justice and try to bring more people into the understanding that people don't make the decision to terminate pregnancies in a vacuum. It's within the context of their entire lives and their relationships with their intimate partners, with their family, things that are going on in the community. Those environments create the conditions that will facilitate a person growing their family in a healthy, sustainable way, or make people decide that this is just not a good idea. I do not want to start a family or grow a family in these conditions. And so when I'm out and speaking, I get the question from women, where are the men? And then the specific question that I get from the men is, how do we have these conversations with each other? So this has been so rich, and providing some context to, this is going to be a video where I'm going to, when it gets posted on YouTube, we're going to be sharing this link. Hey, check out this education, because you guys, it was phenomenal. And thank you so much. I do want to read the comment that Erica put in the chat. And then I want you guys to, if you have any calls to action for us, I'd like for you to share those. So let me go back to Erica. So Erica said, thank you, Mark, for bringing up the importance of accountability. As one of our core values, we emphasize the importance of accountability, both individually and within institutions. This leads to greater scrutiny of systems and policies that perpetuate harm, encouraging reforms that prioritize safety, dignity, and well-being of women and children. For example, there may be increased efforts to hold perpetrators of gender-based violence accountable, as well as initiatives to reform the justice system to better serve survivors of abuse. And everyone, Erica Smith is the CEO of, the executive director, of Voice to Men Tucson. And I was just so happy to partner with you all to bring this really important discussion to us. So do you have any calls to action for our attendees and for those who may watch later, the replay?
Well, definitely one would be, especially for masculine folk, to again help creating that culture of accountability with your peers and the other men in your life, to make sure that they're doing that. Even if you're able to just call out the little things first, just being able to start that. And then shameless plug, if you're looking to get more involved and have more conversations, we're always looking for mentors at Boys to Men Tucson, and we're able to help facilitate this further.
Yeah, I mean, I know that this is, folks are attending statewide, so probably a lot of folks in the Phoenix, Maricopa County area. I mean, if you're in Tucson, Southern Arizona, absolutely we have our resources here. But I think any opportunity to volunteer and be a presence in schools and just schools, other mentoring programs statewide. So again, being curious and looking to see what is available there. We cannot say enough about mentoring and about the need for strong positive role models among our youth. Our youth are really struggling right now. So we need to build in those protective factors, right? We talked about ACEs earlier. We need to be those protective factors for folks who are like, I don't have time to volunteer. Start with yourself, figure out what it is that's going to make you happy and whole, and start there. We always recommend a good read. Bell Hooks is always top of the list. The Will to Change is a fan favorite among all of us. I also mentioned Feminism is for Everyone, and that's actually really centered in reproductive justice as well. So I would put a plug in for that. But anything Bell Hooks and around her work around masculinity, All About Love is another one. I mean, and start anywhere. Just start. That's the only thing I'll say.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Calls to action. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that my call to action would just be on, again, the men in communities. Listen to your families. Be safe. Be a safe man for your family first, and listen to them if they don't feel safe. Right? It's so important to just, I think, kind of men shifting their ideas away from what masculinity has been like kind of hammered into us to be. Men being soft and tender, like it's something that I think is so important to like create safe conditions for these conversations to happen, and for more beautiful things to be spoken and listened to. Because if we're in like high stress environments where there's like yelling or reactivity or like just bravado or machismo and all these different things that are like culturally rooted, and there's like conversations around that as well, we're reducing the conditions in which safe and like transformative discussion can happen, which would lead to transformative action. So I think the call to action is destigmatize these conversations, and men, show up in safe ways.
Thank you all. So this is the conclusion of our educational event. Thank you again, Stephanie Noriega, Mark McKenna, Paul Braden, Boys to Men Tucson.